Detective John Smith woke up to the sound of a phone ringing. He looked at the clock. It was about 3 in the morning. His drowsiness vanished instantly when he heard the voice of his old friend and colleague, Inspector James Richardson. "John, wake up. We've got a problem." James's voice sounded anxious. Without asking unnecessary questions, John quickly got dressed and was in his car within 10 minutes, heading to the scene. His mind was occupied with one question: what could have happened? Upon arriving, John saw a crowd of police officers and forensic experts working around a large gray building. It was the police headquarters, usually quiet and calm at this time of night, but tonight was different. As John stepped out of his car, he noticed that James was standing near the entrance to the building. He looked very grim. "What happened?" John asked, walking closer. Inspector Richardson took a deep breath and replied, "A murder occurred tonight. Someone broke into the building and killed the night watchman. We found the body just an hour ago." A chill ran down John's spine. This was his first case after returning from a long vacation, and it wasn't starting off well. He entered the building with James and examined the crime scene. They found the watchman's body in one of the hallways near the doors to the head of the department's office. The murder weapon appeared to be a sharp object, most likely a knife. The victim's face was contorted in horror, and deep wounds were visible on the body. While forensic experts collected evidence, John began compiling a list of possible suspects. Among them were police officers, people with access to the building, and those who might have had a motive for committing the crime. The list was long, but he knew he needed to thoroughly check each one. After finishing the examination of the crime scene, John returned home to rest before the next stage of the investigation. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. His mind was consumed with thoughts of who could commit such a brutal murder and why. He had a lot of work ahead, but he knew that sooner or later he would find answers to all the questions. After several days of intense work, John Smith finally compiled a preliminary list of suspects. There were 5: local businessman Alex Gordon, former security guard Paul Davis, young secretary Angela Ross, journalist Peter Black, and janitor Willie Hopkins. Each of them had their own motive and opportunity to commit the crime. First on the list was Alex Gordon. This ambitious businessman had lost a significant amount of money due to a failed deal. He also had a long-standing conflict with the head of the department, whose office was where the watchman's body was found. These circumstances made him a highly probable suspect. Second on the list was Paul Davis. He had worked as a security guard in the building until he was fired for suspicious behavior. After being dismissed, he often threatened his former employer with revenge. Moreover, he was seen near the building on the day of the murder. Angela Ross also raised suspicions. She worked as a secretary in the department where the murder occurred and had access to all the rooms. Her husband had recently lost his job, and she might have been desperate. Additionally, she was seen leaving the building shortly before the murder. Journalist Peter Black didn't seem harmless either. He was conducting his own investigation into corruption cases within the police force and might have been looking for compromising material on the head of the department. His motives could have been linked to framing a high-ranking police officer. Finally, there was Willie Hopkins, an elderly janitor who had worked in the building for many years. Although he had no apparent motives, he might have been used as a cover by other suspects. John decided to start with Alex Gordon. He went to his office and spent the entire day reviewing documents and talking to his employees. It soon became clear that Gordon indeed had a motive for the murder, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the crime. Next was Paul Davis. John went to him and conducted an interrogation. Davis denied involvement in the murder, though his nervousness raised doubts. However, John found no direct evidence of his guilt. Third on the list was Angela Ross. She agreed to come in for questioning but was extremely upset and refused to answer most of the questions. John realized she needed psychological help before continuing the interrogation. Peter Black proved less cooperative. When John came to his editorial office, he refused to speak without a lawyer. John left his business card and walked away, deciding to return later. Willie Hopkins turned out to be the hardest to find. After a long search, John learned that he had suddenly fallen ill and was in the hospital. Upon visiting, John discovered that Hopkins was in a coma after suffering a heart attack. Questioning him was impossible. Disappointed by the lack of progress, John decided to take a short break and think about the next strategy. He understood that one of these people might be guilty, but there was still insufficient evidence. All that remained was to continue the investigation and hope for luck. 2 weeks had passed since the night watchman's murder, but John Smith hadn't made any progress in the case. He continued to conduct interrogations and gather evidence, but every time he hit a wall of silence or lacked direct proof. It was evident that the killer had planned carefully and acted meticulously, yet John didn't lose hope. One evening, while reviewing surveillance footage, he noticed a strange figure moving through the building corridors at the time of the murder. The figure wore a hood and concealed their face, but something about their movements seemed familiar to John. Deciding to act, John sought help from his friend and colleague, Sergeant Tom Suhill. Together, they devised a plan to monitor each of the suspects. First on the list was Alex Gordon. To begin, John and Tom decided to keep a distance from Gordon, using surveillance cameras and hidden microphones. Over several days, they gathered enough information to conclude that Gordon was genuinely busy with his affairs and didn't have time to plan and carry out a murder. Next, they moved on to Paul Davis. After long observation, they realized that he spent most of his time at home or in local bars, discussing his unjust dismissal. He often talked about revenge, but never specified whom he wanted to avenge. The next on the list was Angela Ross. They learned that she was seeing a psychotherapist and taking medication to cope with stress. This confirmed her version that she was at home and asleep on the night of the murder. Turning to journalist Peter Black, John and Tom encountered a new problem. Black was cautious and always surrounded by people. They decided to try close surveillance, but soon realized it was too risky. Finally, there was Willie Hopkins. John decided to visit him in the hospital to try and learn more. However, Willie was still in a coma, and doctors gave no prognosis regarding his condition. Despite the lack of concrete results, John felt they were getting closer to solving the case. He knew they needed to continue the investigation and not give up. John Smith continued the investigation, trying to find new clues and leads. In the process, he noticed some details that previously seemed insignificant. One such detail was a diary found in Paul Davis's home. It was a personal diary that Paul had started after being fired from the building's security staff. In it, he detailed his feelings and emotions and mentioned people he considered responsible for his dismissal. One of these people was the head of the department, whose office was where the watchman's body was found. Reading Paul's diary, John noticed an entry made 2 days before the murder. In it, Paul wrote about planning something significant to avenge those who wronged him. John realized this entry could be a key piece of evidence in the case. Together with Sergeant Tom Hill, John returned to Paul's house and conducted a search. They found more entries in the diary, confirming his possible involvement in the murder. Moreover, they discovered a map marking the location of the police building. This evidence was compelling. But John understood they needed additional proof. He decided to conduct another interrogation of Paul. The interrogation took place in the presence of Paul's lawyer. John presented him with the diary and asked if he knew who might have made the entry. Paul initially denied involvement, but when John showed him the map, he began to get nervous. After a lengthy conversation, Paul confessed that he indeed planned to take revenge on the department head. He explained that he had been preparing for weeks but never thought he'd get caught. John warned him of potential legal consequences and took him into custody. It seemed the case was almost closed, but then something unexpected happened. Paul's lawyer made a statement that shocked everyone. He said Paul wasn't the only one planning the murder. Another person was involved who had an interest in the Watchman's death. That person had conspired with Paul and used him for their purposes. John and Tom couldn't believe their ears. Who could be behind this? Had they made a mistake accusing Paul of the crime? John decided it was time to conduct a new investigation and uncover the truth. John Smith and Sergeant Tom Hill returned to the night watchman's murder case with renewed energy. They knew they had to find the real culprit, no matter how much time it took. First, they conducted a thorough analysis of all the evidence and testimonies they received from Paul Davis. John discovered that Paul wasn't lying about his role in the murder but was used by someone else. That person turned out to be Angela Ross, the secretary John initially suspected. An analysis of her financial transactions revealed that she was experiencing serious financial difficulties and was involved in questionable deals. Her husband had recently lost his job, and she was willing to do anything to recover the money. When John and Tom confronted her with this information, she initially tried to deny involvement, but eventually broke down and told the whole truth. She admitted that she proposed the murder plan to Paul in exchange for a large sum of money. She intended to use the money to cover her debts and save her family from bankruptcy. Angela revealed that she had planned every detail in advance, including breaking into the building and using Paul as the executor. She knew the department head would be working late and leave his office unlocked. Paul was supposed to sneak in and kill the watchman to make it look like a random attack. However, as John and Tom investigated these claims, they found inconsistencies. Angela claimed she found Paul's diary by chance, but in reality, she had planted it in his house to mislead investigators. This confirmed that Angela was the mastermind behind the crime. Once all the evidence was collected, John and Tom arrested Angela. She was taken to the station, where she spent the night awaiting trial. The next few months were spent preparing for the court proceedings. John and Tom presented all the gathered evidence and witness statements to the court. Angela admitted her guilt and was sentenced to a long prison term. The case was officially closed, and John Smith received deserved recognition from his superiors. He understood that this case was not just a job, but a true test of his professional qualities and persistence. Now that the case was closed, John decided to take a short vacation and spend time with his family. He knew new investigations and mysteries awaited him, but for now, he enjoyed the moment of peace and satisfaction from a successfully completed mission.